The office on the 42nd floor of the glass tower didn't feel like a workplace. It felt like an aquarium. It was cold, silent, and everyone was watching everyone else through the glass walls, waiting for someone to float belly up. The new girl, whom they called the temp, even though she was a senior analyst, sat at the furthest desk by the supply closet. Her name was Riley. She was 32, wore her hair in a tight, sensible bun, and never participated in the Friday happy hours or the mid-morning coffee gossip. To the rest of the team, Riley was a ghost. She was a body in a chair, a set of hands typing away at spreadsheets, and someone they assumed was just happy to have a paycheck. The inner circle was led by a man named Vance. Vance was the kind of guy who wore $2,000 suits and spent more time whitening his teeth than checking his data. He had 3 lieutenants, a woman named Sloan who used sarcasm like a weapon, and 2 guys named Jax and Reed, who followed Vance around like hungry shadows. To them, Riley was a non-entity. She was a convenient tool. "She's perfect," Vance whispered one afternoon, leaning against the break room counter while Riley was visible in the distance, focused on her screen. "She doesn't talk. She doesn't have any powerful friends in the company, and she looks like the type who would just apologize for existing if you stepped on her foot." The team was in deep trouble. They had spent 6 months on the Apex account, a multi-billion-dollar logistics contract. The problem was, Vance had been lazy. He delegated the core calculations to Jax and Reed, who had spent their time golfing instead of auditing. Now, 48 hours before the final presentation to the board, they realized there was an $8 million hole in the projections. It wasn't a typo. It was a disaster. If the board saw it, Vance and his crew wouldn't just be fired. They'd be blacklisted from the industry. They needed a fall guy. Or, in this case, a fall girl. "Hey, Riley," Vance said, strolling over to her desk with a fake, charming smile that didn't reach his eyes. He dropped a heavy stack of folders on her desk. "Listen, the team is slammed finishing the creative side of the Apex pitch. We need you to take these final data sets, run the closing numbers, and sign off on the audit report. Can you handle that for us?" Riley looked up. Her eyes were a very calm, very flat gray. She didn't look intimidated. She didn't look in-and-ired. She just looked at the folders. "You want me to sign the final audit? I haven't been involved in the preliminary stages." "It's just a formality," Sloan piped in, appearing behind Vance. "We've done all the heavy lifting. We just need a fresh set of eyes to put the stamp on it. It's a big responsibility, but we think you're ready for the big leagues." Riley didn't smile back. She reached out and touched the edge of the folder. "I see." "Great. Get it done by tomorrow morning," Vance said, clapping her on the shoulder. He felt her shoulder. It felt like a piece of iron under her blazer, but he was too busy thinking about his own skin to wonder why a quiet office girl felt like she was made of rebar. For the next 14 hours, Riley stayed at her desk. The office emptied out. The cleaning crew came and went. The city lights outside flickered and hummed. Riley didn't just sign off. She read. She traced every line, every botched calculation, and every deliberate attempt to hide the deficit. She saw exactly what they were doing. They were handing her a ticking time bomb and asking her to hold it until it went off. The next morning, the boardroom was packed. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and anxiety. The CEO, a stern man who valued loyalty above all else, sat at the head of the table. Vance stood at the front of the room, looking polished and confident. "Before we begin the data walkthrough," Vance said, his voice steady, "I have to bring up a very difficult internal matter. As we were finalizing the Apex report last night, we discovered some irregularities, massive ones." The room went cold. The CEO leaned forward. "What kind of irregularities, Vance?" Vance sighed, performing a perfect act of disappointed mentor. He pointed a finger toward the back of the room where Riley was sitting in a folding chair, away from the main table. It seems our newest addition, Riley, was tasked with the final audit. In her haste to impress us, she took some extreme liberties with the numbers to make the project look more profitable than it is. It was a reckless attempt at career climbing that almost cost this company its reputation. Luckily, Jackson Reed caught the discrepancy this morning. Sloane shook her head, looking at Riley with practiced disgust. It's a shame. We really tried to bring her into the fold, but some people just don't have the integrity for this level of work. The CEO turned his gaze to Riley. It was a look that would have melted most people. Is this true? You signed off on a fraudulent audit. Riley didn't flinch. She didn't stand up and scream. She didn't stand up and scream. She didn't cry. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like a person who was watching a movie she had already seen before. I signed the document they gave me, Riley said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a strange, vibrating weight. I was told the data was verified by Mr. Vance's team. And you didn't check it. That's gross negligence, the CEO barked. Vance, clear her desk. I want her out of this building in 10 minutes. We'll deal with the fallout of your team's mistake later, but she is finished. Vance walked over to Riley. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, and whispered so only she could hear. Nothing personal, sweetheart. You're just the easiest thing to throw under the bus. Don't make a scene. It'll only make it worse. Riley looked at him. For the first time, a tiny, almost invisible smile touched the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator watching a trap snap shut. I won't make a scene, she whispered back. She stood up, tucked her chair in neatly, and walked out. She didn't take her personal photos from her desk. She didn't take her mug. She walked straight to the elevator, her back straight, her stride measured and rhythmic. As the elevator doors closed, Vance and his team laughed in relief. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully buried their sins under the career of a woman who didn't matter. They thought she was going home to hide. They didn't see her as she reached the lobby. She didn't head for the subway. She walked across the street to a park bench, sat down, and pulled a high-end encrypted phone from her pocket. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years. This is Riley, she said into the phone. The softness in her voice was gone. It was replaced by a cold, tactical precision. The asset is compromised. They played the card exactly like we predicted. Initiate the deep dive on the Apex servers. I'm going into the after-action phase now, and tell the recruiters I'm back on the market. But first, I have a few things to finish here. Riley took a deep breath, the kind of breath a diver takes before plunging into dark water. The girl they thought they knew was gone. The person who was left was someone they were never supposed to meet. Vance didn't waste any time. The moment the elevator doors closed on Riley, he let out a long, shaky breath and then clapped his hands together. To anyone watching, he looked like a man who had just survived a brush with disaster. To his team, it was the signal that the problem had been dealt with. Dinner is on me tonight, Vance announced to the office, his voice booming with a false sense of triumph. We survived a close call thanks to some quick thinking. Let's get back to work and show the board what real professionals look like. Sloane, Jax, and Reed followed him into his private office, shutting the heavy glass door. Once inside, the atmosphere changed from professional to predatory. They weren't mourning the loss of a colleague. They were high-fiving. Did you see her face? Jax laughed, leaning back in a leather chair. She didn't even fight back. I thought she was going to faint. I almost felt bad for a second, but then I remembered my Christmas bonus. Sloane poured herself a glass of water from the carafe on Vance's desk. She was the perfect choice. No family in the city, no big reputation, and so quiet. You forget she's even in the room. By the time she finds a lawyer to even look at her termination papers, the Apex deal will be signed, sealed, and delivered. She's a ghost now. Vance nodded, though he was still buzzing with adrenaline. The CEO wants a corrected report by Monday morning. We'll spend the weekend fixing the mess she supposedly made. We just need to move a few more numbers around, bury the deficit in the long-term projections, and we're golden. She took the blame for the signature, so even if an auditor looks at it later, her name is the one on the line. They felt untouchable. In their world, the loudest person won, and the person who spoke the least was just floor matting. They spent the rest of the afternoon ordering expensive takeout and laughing about how they would spend their commissions. Meanwhile, Riley wasn't at home crying into a tub of ice cream. She was sitting in a small, dimly lit apartment on the other side of the city. The space was sparse, almost military in its neatness. There were no decorative pillows, no cluttered shelves, just a desk, a very powerful laptop, and a wall covered in specialized whiteboards. She had changed out of her office blazer and into a simple black hoodie. Her hair was no longer in a neat bun. It hung loose, framing a face that looked entirely different than it had 3 hours ago. The blank expression she wore at the office wasn't the sign of boredom. It was a mask of extreme observation. Riley opened a folder on her computer. It wasn't full of spreadsheets. It was full of screen captures. Every time Vance had leaned over her shoulder, every time Jax had left his computer unlocked to go grab a latte, every time Sloane had bragged about her creative accounting near the break room Riley had been recording. She hadn't just been a senior analyst, she had been an investigator. Years ago, before she tried to live a normal life, Riley had served in a specialized intelligence unit. Her job wasn't just about combat, it was about digital forensics and psychological warfare. She had left that world because the pressure was too much, seeking the quiet of a corporate job. But as she looked at the glowing screen, she realized that the corporate world was just a different kind of Battlefield 1, where the enemies wore suits instead of fatigues. "You should have checked my references a little deeper, Vance," she muttered to the empty room. She began to type. Her fingers moved with a speed and rhythm that would have terrified her former coworkers. She wasn't just looking for the $8 million error. She was looking for the trail of breadcrumbs that led back to Vance's personal bank accounts. She knew how guys like Vance worked. Someone with that much ego doesn't just make a mistake. They make a profit. By 9 p.m., she found it. Vance hadn't just been lazy with the Apex account. He had been skimming. He'd created a shell company that provided consulting services for the firm. Every time a big project like Apex came through, a few $100,000 would disappear into that shell company for work that was never actually done. The $8 million hole wasn't just bad math. It was the total sum of 3 years of theft. Riley leaned back, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in her eyes. She felt a familiar hum in her chest. It was the mission click, the moment where all the pieces fit together and the target was locked. She could have called the police. She could have called the CEO right then. But Riley knew how these things went. If she just sent an email, the firm's high-priced lawyers would find a way to spin it. They would say she hacked the system to frame Vance because she was angry about being fired. She needed something undeniable. She needed to let them think they were winning right until the moment the floor vanished beneath them. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small, encrypted USB drive. It was gold-colored and heavy. She hadn't used it in years. She began to write a series of automated scripts. One would monitor Vance's emails in real time. Another would track the consulting company's bank movements. The third was the finisher. It was a program designed to trigger a full-scale external audit from the Federal Oversight Board, the kind of audit that no amount of fancy suits or whitening strips could stop. But she wasn't going to trigger it yet. In the military, they taught her about shaping the battlefield. You don't just strike, you move the enemy into the position where they are most vulnerable. Riley checked her watch. It was nearly midnight. She hadn't eaten, but she wasn't hungry. She felt more alive than she had in months. The quiet, boring Riley who drank green tea was officially dead. The specialist was back. She sent one single, anonymous text message to Vance's private phone. It didn't contain a threat. It didn't contain her name. It just contained a single PDF attachment, a copy of the receipt from his shell company from 2 years ago. Then she turned off her phone and went to sleep. She slept like a baby, while 6 miles away in a penthouse apartment. Vance's phone buzzed on his nightstand. Vance picked it up, expecting a message from a girlfriend or a friend. He opened the file. His face went from a healthy tan to a sickly, pale gray in 3 seconds. He tried to call the number back, but it was disconnected. He tried to trace the source, but his screen just looped back to his own IP address. He sat up in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. The new girl was gone, but the ghost was starting to haunt him. He looked at the shadows in the corner of his room and, for the first time in his life, he felt like he was being hunted. The sun rose on Saturday morning, but for Vance, the weekend was already a nightmare. He hadn't slept a wink. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that PDF on his phone screen. It was a ghost from his past, a digital receipt he thought he had deleted years ago. He sat in his kitchen, staring at a cup of black coffee, wondering who could have sent it. He didn't think of Riley. To him, Riley was a broken tool he had tossed in the trash. He assumed it was a rival vice president or perhaps a disgruntled IT guy he had insulted. By 10 a.m., Vance couldn't handle the silence anymore. He called a frantic meeting at the office. Even though it was a Saturday, he demanded that Sloan, Jax, and Reed show up. When they arrived, the office felt different. Without the usual buzz of the 100-plus staff, the glass walls felt like they were closing in. Vance looked terrible. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot. "We have a problem," Vance said, throwing his phone onto the conference table. "Someone sent me this last night. They know about the consulting fees." Sloan picked up the phone, her brow furrowing as she scrolled. Her face drained of color. "This is impossible. We scrubbed these servers 3 times. Only the 4 of us knew the name of that shell company. Maybe the new girl wasn't as quiet as we thought," Jack suggested, though he sounded unsure. "Riley?" Reed laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "Come on, I saw her desk. She had a picture of a cat and a calendar with motivational quotes. She's probably at home looking for a job at a library. She doesn't have the spine for blackmail." Vance slammed his hand on the table. "I don't care who it is. If this gets out, we aren't just fired. We're going to prison. We need to finalize the Apex report and move the funds out of that account immediately. If we can zero out the shell company's balance, we can claim it was a clerical error." While they panicked in the tower, Riley was 4 miles away at a public park. She wasn't hiding. She was wearing a simple tracksuit, jogging a steady. She was wearing a simple tracksuit, jogging a steady, rhythmic pace. Her mind was clear. In her old life, they called this situational awareness. She knew exactly what Vance would do. He was a creature of habit. When cornered, a man like that doesn't run. He tries to hide the evidence. And in doing so, he always leaves a bigger trail. Riley stopped at a bench and opened a small, rugged tablet she kept in her gym bag. She tapped into the office's internal network. She had installed a back door months ago, not because she planned to be a criminal, but because her training taught her never to trust a structural system she didn't fully understand. She watched the cursor move on Vance's screen in real time. She could see them opening files, frantically trying to delete transaction logs. "Go ahead, Vance," she whispered. "Move the money. Make it obvious." Every time Vance moved a file, Riley's script automatically mirrored it to a secure cloud drive. He was doing all the hard work for her. He was gathering all the evidence of his fraud into one neat little folder, thinking he was making it disappear. But Riley wasn't just focused on the data. She was focused on the people. She knew that a team built on lies would crumble the moment the heat got too high. She waited until she saw Sloan leave the conference room to go to the restroom. Riley sent a second message. This one went to Sloan's personal email. It was a short note. "Vance is planning to tell the CEO that the shell company was your idea. He's already moving the funds to an account in your name. Don't be the last one without a parachute." It was a lie. But it was a lie based on how Vance actually operated. Riley knew that Sloan was the smartest of the group, and therefore the most paranoid. 10 minutes later, Riley watched through the office's security camera feed as Sloan walked back into the room. Her body language had changed. She was no longer standing close to Vance. She sat across from him, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed. "Vance," Sloan said, her voice dripping with ice. "I want to see the login credentials for the shell account. Right now." "Not now, Sloan. We're busy," Vance snapped. "I'm not asking," she replied. "I want to make sure my name isn't attached to anything you're moving right now." The cracks were forming. Riley closed her tablet and continued her jog. She felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. These people had spent years stepping on others, treating people like Riley as if they were invisible and disposable. They thought being nice or quiet meant you were a victim. They didn't realize that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one taking the most notes. As the afternoon turned into evening, the inner circle spent their time arguing instead of fixing the problem. Jackson Reed started to get nervous, realizing that if Vance and Sloan went down, they would be dragged along too. By 6 p.m., the office was a war zone of accusations. Vance was shouting, Sloan was threatening to call her lawyer, and the Apex report sat unfinished on the screen. Riley arrived back at her apartment. She showered, made a simple meal, and sat at her window overlooking the city. She thought about the Navy SEAL mindset she had studied during her training years. It wasn't about being the strongest or the loudest. It was about mental toughness, the ability to remain calm while everything around you is falling apart. She looked at her old uniform, tucked away in a trunk at the back of her closet. She didn't want to wear it again, but she realized she didn't need the clothes to be that person. The new girl was a mask, but the warrior was the reality. She opened her laptop one last time for the night. She didn't send a threat. She didn't send a leak. Instead, she sent an email to the CEO's private secretary. The subject line was simple: the $8 million gap, a solution. She didn't attach the evidence yet. She just provided a list of 3 questions the CEO should ask Vance during the Monday morning meeting. They were technical questions about server logs and consulting invoices that seemed innocent enough but would be impossible to answer without admitting to the fraud. Riley climbed into bed and turned off the lights. She knew that Monday morning would be the final fight. Vance thought he had finished her when he fired her in front of the board. He didn't realize he had just given her the perfect vantage point to watch him fall. She closed her eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She was ready. Monday morning at the office felt like the air before a lightning strike. The usual chatter at the coffee machine was gone. Everyone had heard that the quiet girl had been fired for a massive mistake, but the mood wasn't celebratory. There was a heaviness in the hallway. Vance walked into the building at 8 a.m., trying his best to look like a winner. He had spent the entire night using eye drops to hide his exhaustion and drinking espresso to stop his hands from shaking. Behind him, Sloan, Jax, and Reed walked in a tight formation. They looked less like a team and more like people sharing a life raft that was slowly leaking air. "Is the presentation ready?" Vance asked, his voice cracking slightly. "It's as ready as it's going to be," Sloan said. She didn't look at him. She hadn't looked at him since Saturday. They entered the large boardroom. The CEO, a man named Mr. Sterling, was already there. He wasn't sitting at the head of the table like usual. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city. He didn't turn around when they entered. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Vance said, setting his leather briefcase on the table with a purposeful thud. "We've had a busy weekend. We've managed to clean up the mess that Riley left behind. We prepared a corrected audit that shows the Apex account is back on track. It was a close call, but the team really stepped up." Mr. Sterling stayed silent for a long moment. Then he turned around. He wasn't holding the Apex report. He was holding a small, printed list of 3 questions. "Vance," Mr. Sterling said quietly, "before we get into the numbers, I want to clarify a few technical points. I was doing some light reading last night and I became curious about our vendor list." Vance felt a cold bead of sweat roll down his spine. "Of course, sir. Anything." "Can you tell me about a company called Blue Horizon Consulting?" Sterling asked. "They seem to have been paid quite a bit over the last 3 years for data optimization. Yet I can't find a single person in this building who has ever spoken to one of their representatives." The silence in the room was deafening. Jackson Reed looked at the floor. Sloan gripped her pen so hard her knuckles turned white. I'd have to check the archives, sir," Vance stammered. "That might have been a legacy contract from before my time, or perhaps something Riley was managing in her department." "Interesting," Sterling said, walking toward the table. "Because the digital footprint of that company seems to originate from an IP address inside this very room, specifically from your home office, Vance." Vance opened his mouth to lie, to spin another web, but the door to the boardroom opened. Everyone turned. They expected a security guard or a late executive. Instead, Riley walked in. She wasn't wearing the drab, oversized blazer they were used to. She was wearing a sharp, charcoal gray suit that fit her perfectly. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail so tight it looked like it was meant for a high-speed chase. She didn't look like a quiet office girl. She looked like a commanding officer entering a debriefing room. She wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits followed, her external auditors from the Federal Oversight Board. Vance's face went a ghostly shade of blue. "What are you doing here?" "You were terminated." "Security." "Sit down, Vance," Mr. Sterling said. His voice was no longer quiet. It was a roar. "I invited her. It turns out Riley didn't just sign your report. She tagged it. She embedded a digital watermark in the files she signed on Friday, a tracker that alerted me the moment anyone tried to alter the data over the weekend." Riley walked to the head of the table. She didn't look angry. She looked completely professional, which was somehow more terrifying. She set a tablet down and tapped the screen, projecting a massive spreadsheet onto the wall. "On Friday, you dropped me because you thought I was a soft target," Riley said. Her voice was steady and calm, the voice of someone who had practiced speaking in high-pressure environments for years. "You thought I was too new to understand the system and too timid to fight back. That was your first mistake." She swiped her finger across the tablet. "Your second mistake was thinking I was just an analyst. My background is in forensic accounting for the military. I didn't come to this firm because I needed a job. I came here because this firm was flagged for internal inconsistencies 18 months ago. I've been watching you since the day I arrived." Jax let out a small, pathetic whimper. Reed looked like he was about to bolt for the door. The $8 million hole you tried to pin on me isn't a mistake, Riley continued, looking Vance dead in the eye. It's a trail. I followed the money from the Apex account through the Blue Horizon Shell Company and straight into a private offshore account. I've already handed the encrypted logs over to the gentleman standing behind me. Vance tried to stand up, his face twisted in rage. This is a setup. She's a disgruntled ex-employee. She's hacking the system to frame us. One of the external auditors stepped forward. Mr. Vance, we've been monitoring your outgoing wire transfers since Saturday morning, when an anonymous tip provided us with your private login credentials. We watched you move $400,000 at 2:15 a.m. yesterday. We have the digital signature. It's over. Sloan stood up, her eyes darting between Vance and Riley. I didn't know the extent of it. I was just following orders. Riley, you have to believe me, I was just. Riley didn't even look at her. You had 100 chances to be a decent person, Sloan. You chose the other path every time. You didn't drop me because you had to. You dropped me because you had to. You dropped me because it was easy. You thought I was weak. But the thing about being the new girl is that people show you who they really are, because they don't think you're worth hiding from. Mr. Sterling looked at Riley with a mix of awe and embarrassment. Riley, I owe you an apology. I should have seen this. With all due respect, sir, Riley said. You hired these people. You built a culture where people like Vance could thrive. I'm not here to save your company. I'm here to finish the job I started. She turned to the auditors. The server logs are fully backed up. The evidence is categorized by date, time, and user ID. The fight is over. Vance collapsed back into his chair. He looked small. For the first time, the expensive suit looked like it was wearing him rather than the other way around. He looked at Riley and saw the truth. She had never been his victim. She had been his judge from the very beginning. Riley picked up her tablet. She didn't wait for the handcuffs to come out. She didn't stay to watch the shouting match that was about to erupt. She had completed the mission. As she walked out of the boardroom, the CEO called out, "Riley, wait! We need someone like you. I'll double your salary. Triple it. You can have Vance's office." Riley paused at the door. She looked back at the glass aquarium of an office. She thought about the quiet life she had tried to build and realized that she didn't belong in a glass box. She belonged out where the real battles were fought. "I don't want the office," Riley said with a faint, sharp smile. "I'm moving on to the next mission." She walked out of the office, and this time the entire floor was watching her. But they weren't watching a ghost anymore. They were watching a legend. The lobby of the glass tower was quiet as Riley walked through the revolving doors for the last time. Outside, the city was humming with its usual chaos sirens in the distance, people rushing to meetings, and the smell of roasted coffee in the air. For the first time in years, Riley didn't feel like she was hiding. She felt like she was finally breathing. Back on the 42nd floor, the silence was much heavier. It was the kind of silence that follows a shipwreck. Vance sat in the boardroom, staring at his own reflection in the polished wood of the table. The auditors were still there, methodically packing his laptop and his personal phone into evidence bags. There were no more jokes, no more clever lines, and no more expensive suits to protect him. Within the hour, a company-wide email was sent out stating that Vance, Sloan, Jax, and Reed had been released from their duties effective immediately due to gross misconduct. The inner circle was escorted out of the building by security. There was no grand exit. They were let out through the service elevator, the same one used for trash and deliveries. Sloan was crying, Jax was arguing with a guard, and Vance just looked empty. They'd spent their lives building a mountain of lies, only to find out that the foundation was made of sand. 3 days later, Riley sat in a small, sunlight-filled diner downtown. She was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, looking like any other person in the city. She had a physical newspaper spread out on the table, a habit from her training days when digital footprints were things you avoided. On page 4, there was a small article about the firm. It mentioned a major restructuring and the discovery of a long-term embezzlement scheme. The names of the executives were listed, and the article noted that criminal charges were being filed. Riley scanned the names without any sense of joy or malice. It was just data. The mission was closed. Her phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't an unknown number, but it used a specific code she recognized. She answered it. "I heard you finished the audit," a gravelly voice said on the other end. It was her old commanding officer from her time in the service, a man who had always respected her talent for finding the truth in a sea of noise. "I did," Riley said, stirring her tea. "It was messier than I expected. People in suits are much more predictable than people in uniforms." The man laughed. "That's because they think the rules don't apply to them until they're staring at the bars of a cell." "Listen, Riley, I'm calling because the quiet life clearly doesn't suit you. You spent 6 months trying to be a normal analyst, and you ended up taking down a multi-million-dollar fraud ring in a weekend. You're a shark, kid. You can't live in a goldfish bowl." Riley looked out the window. "I thought I wanted the quiet. I thought I was tired of the fight." "You weren't tired of the fight," the man replied. "You were just tired of the wrong enemies. There's a new task force forming. It's private, high stakes, and it deals with the kind of people who think they're too big to fail. We need a lead investigator who can walk into a room, look at 1,000 lies, and find the one truth that brings it all down. Are you interested?" Riley didn't answer right away. She thought about the last few months. She thought about how Vance and his team had treated her, not just the firing, but the daily dismissals, the way they spoke over her, and the way they assumed she was just a girl who didn't understand the game. She realized that the world was full of people like that, people who thought that being loud was the same thing as being powerful. "What's the first target?" Riley asked. The man on the phone smiled. She could hear it in his voice. "A logistics conglomerate in the Midwest. They're hiding something big in their supply chain. It's going to take someone who knows how to be invisible until it's too late for them to run." "I'll be there on Monday," Riley said. She hung up the phone and felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She paid for her tea and walked out of the diner. She felt lighter, faster, and more focused. She realized that her time at the firm hadn't been a waste of time. It had been a reminder. It reminded her that your value isn't determined by what people think of you. It's determined by what you're capable of doing when the pressure is on. She walked toward her apartment, already planning her next moves. She would need to update her equipment, secure her data, and leave the Riley who worked at the glass tower behind. That version of her was just a character she played, a disguise that allowed her to see the world for what it really was. As she crossed the street, she saw a young woman walking toward the same glass tower she had just left. The girl looked nervous, clutching a briefcase and checking her watch. She was likely a new hire, a new girl heading into the lion's den. Riley stopped her for a brief second. "Excuse me," Riley said softly. The girl looked up, startled. "Yes? Just a piece of advice," Riley said, her eyes kind but sharp. "Don't let them tell you who you are, and always keep your eyes open. The loudest people in that building are usually the ones with the most to lose." The girl looked confused, but she nodded. "Thanks. I'll remember that." Riley watched her walk away. She knew the girl would probably face some of the same challenges she did, but maybe, just maybe, she'd be a little more prepared. Riley turned the corner and disappeared into the crowd. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She wasn't a victim. She was a professional who had finished one fight and was heading straight for the next. The new girl was gone, and in her place was a woman who knew exactly how much damage a quiet person could do. The city kept moving, the glass tower kept shining in the sun, and the world kept turning. But for 4 people sitting in a holding cell waiting for their lawyers, and for one woman walking with a purpose through the streets, everything had changed. Riley had woken up, she had finished the fight, and she was just getting started.